everyone. Great to have you all here for a little bit more of our Shutdown Brunch PL. Been a little gobsmacked again at the number of registrations, so welcome along. I hope that we can be of service to you today. I'm reminded of some of the realities of isolation at the moment. I know that I'm working from the home office today, and that means being here with my family, and that means being here at the exact time running a webinar that we have a delivery truck out the front delivering a new dining table. So any bumps and thumps and crashes and things like that that you may hear in the background today can be attributed to that. It reminds me a little bit of what's, I think, been happening in schools, which is the pivoting, which is the adjusting that school leaders and the teachers are doing on the run here. The incredible job that has been done in moving to a whole new model of education experience for our young people. I think there's a temptation there to say education delivery, but what we're not doing is delivering education. What I'm seeing is people who are moving across to an online platform that's allowing them to maintain connection first and to leverage that connection for high quality learning, which I think is just absolutely fantastic. I think it's fantastic, but because it shows what school leaders and teachers are able to prioritise when we just sort of, if I may be so blunt, get the hell out of the way and let them do what they need to do. I think that that's a really impressive thing. It sort of, I guess, in some ways reminds me of the work of the amazing Professor Shigata Mitra when he did his, several years ago now, when he did his hole in the wall experiment. And what he did was, thump a whole heap of computers into walls in slums in India, and then got out of the way, and just to see what happens, just to see what people do with technology in their own environment when nobody stops them. And he was trying to run a bit of a theory, a bit of a belief that we don't need teachers. And let's just see if he could prove or disprove that theory. And he thought that he would come back after a month of leaving English-speaking, English-coded computers in the slums of India. He thought he would come back and be able to prove that they'd done nothing with it. And he came back and asked the young people there, well, did you, learn anything from the computers that you used every day? And they said, no, not much. And he said, well, good, I've proven my theory, until one 13-year-old girl put her hand up and said, well, actually, apart from the fact that I now understand the full photosynthesis process in plants, I learned absolutely nothing. When we do put that technology in the hands of people, unrestrict them, and let them get to work, they do some pretty amazing stuff. And some of the stuff that I've seen teachers and school leaders doing in the last few weeks has blown my mind. It's a reminder to me. I'm actually, I think I have to go and do a little bit of media today for the project around the challenges that schools, particularly our secondary schools, are facing around year 12, and what happens with ATAR versus some of the projected stuff around learner profiles, and what the opportunities or the threats could be in that space. It reminds me that if we panic about the outcome and try to over control it, we're going to restrict what people actually can do. And what we need to do as leaders sometimes is to support our staff by being that person who gets out of the way. There's a temptation as a leader sometimes to step into control, to step into being the person who makes all the decisions. And that's not always helpful. And I want to even remember that today by engaging you as much as I possibly can. So I'd like to, if I can, before we kick off today, make this a conversation more than I make it a presentation. This really genuinely ain't no presentation. I'm going to pause. I've got my team in the background making sure that they're keeping me up to date. I've got a chat box open. I can keep an eye on attendees. So it's when I say keep an eye on, don't panic. I can't see through your webcam or anything like that, but I can turn your audio on. I can allow you to talk if there's something that you want to add to the conversation today. And I want to encourage you to do that. So what I do want to do is to check in first by using the chat box, if that's okay. So you'll see an option for you to use the chat box. There's a fabulous leader that I worked with in the Northern Territory. His name was Greg Jarvis. And he used to say, to ask me sometimes, you know, if my tank had gone to empty. He'd sort of see me lose the plot over something. I think we all occasionally have moments where we lose the plot. And Greg would say, just come into my office and shut the door and go, tank a bit empty? And I'd go, oh, yeah. You know, so the question I want to ask to kick you off here, and I thank Anne-Marie and Mark for jumping in so quickly. It's just fabulous to see people using that chat box. I want to ask you 2 questions, and I'm wondering if you could provide me with 2 numerical answers to kick this webinar off today. The first number I want you to put in the chat box is, how full is your tank? You give yourself a score out of 10, 0 for empty and F for full. Don't type it in yet. Don't type it in yet. And then the second number I want you to put in there is a little bit of how full do you think your team's tank is? So Greg would often ask us, you know, how full is your tank? But then he would also ask me sometimes, and what about your people? What about your people? How full do you reckon their tank is? These are important numbers. So what I want you to do is to put one number first for how full your tank is in terms of your well-being, your ability to be at your best as a leader at the moment. And then what I want you to do is to think about the people that you lead and how full do you think their tank is. 2 numbers, one for yourself and one for them. Where do you think they're at? What's fascinating, thank you. I can see James, Mark, Elizabeth, Kylie, Anne-Marie, Brooke. Yeah, well, they're all coming through now. Okay. So that's fabulous. Victoria's at a 7, 5 for the team. Yeah. Okay. Greg used to do a really fascinating thing sometimes where he used to ban the use of the number 7, which is terrible news for, you know, for Christine, who's got 7 and 7, because he used to say that 7 was the number that we put when we don't want to tell the truth. So he'd make us think a little bit more deeply about it. I'm going to respect the 7s that are coming through today. That's fabulous. Thank you so much. That gives me a real guide for where everybody's at today. And I think that I think that both numbers matter. So why I mean both numbers matter is that occasionally the greatest leadership in terms of support that you can provide is in terms of yourself and looking after yourself. And we spoke about that in one of the webinars that we ran last week. So if you haven't caught that one, make sure that that leadership webinar, go and have a look at some of the pre-recordings that we've done of these webinars, because there's a whole domain in there about how you can look after yourself and help to sort of fill your own tank up. And then sometimes that number of team is worth thinking about, because if you've got a higher number than your team, it's likely that you're generating ideas at a rate that they're not capable of consuming. So we need to do a little work into making sure that their tank's full so that they can engage with those ideas. Thank you very much for giving me a bit of an idea of where you're at today. It's awesome to have just so many people stepping up, and I want to encourage you to continue doing that across the webinar. Now that I know that you can use a keyboard and you can engage with an online session as though it's not a TV show, I really want you to make sure that you do step up and be a part of the webinar today. If you've got a comment or you've got a question, then by all means whack it in the chat box. If you want to if you're feeling brave and you feel like you want to be unmuted, then please make sure that you do the same thing. You'll notice in the chat box that Simon and Amy are in the webinar with us today. They're going to post you some details of some other things you might want to get your teachers involved in. For instance, tomorrow Simon's webinar that he's just posted about is the brain under strain. I'm going to talk about that a little more later on. That'll be a really good one for your teachers to get involved in. So feel free to do things like cut and paste those and send them off to your staff, or as we go along today. But if you think that you can make a contribution, the thing about a webinar is sometimes people come along for wisdom, and that wisdom doesn't need to come from me. I'm going to try and get really granular. You'll see that I'm big on that word at the moment as we move forward. And I really want to encourage you to share those granular, small little things that are really going to be useful in terms of supporting your staff at the moment. Okay, the mindset that I hit this day with today is what I call the supporter mindset. I think there are, while we've done some valuable work in school leadership in schools around Australia for many years now, and we've used several different mindsets and approaches to leadership, and we all are aware with things like servant leadership, and We're aware of things like a leader as delegator and instructional leadership and all these different mindsets that we can take to our leadership. The one that I come from today is what I call supporter mindset, which I think is really important, because what we need to do is first of all distinguish here what we mean by supporter as opposed to rescuer. So when it comes to support versus rescue, I think that it's really important that we realise that rescue has its place. Rescue's there for when we actually can't fix it ourselves. We need to rescue people from situations where they are utterly helpless, from life or death situations. So, you know, for me, I certainly don't want support when I'm bobbing around in the middle of the ocean and the Westpac helicopter is hovering above me. I do not need that helicopter giving me advice on how to freestyle better or how to float better. I need a ladder. You know, rescue me at that point. For most of our staffs at the moment, they're not drowning. They're finding it difficult, they're finding challenge, but they're also finding even perhaps a little excitement in being able to reimagine what the education experience for our kids might be. So what they need is for you to step into that supporter mindset. They need for you to make sure that you are not absolving them of the opportunity to do fabulous stuff. There's a mantra associated with the rescue leader, and the rescue leader says things like, if you want something done right, you've got to do it yourself. And so what we do is we overwork ourselves. Our first tank number starts to go down, and our people start to become disappointed because we're not capable of stepping up to that role of rescuing. Rescuing involves a lot of effort. It's labour intensive. And if you're going to commit to rescuing your people and doing all of the work for them at this point, you're going to wear yourself out, and you're going to bring your own tank number down significantly, reasonably quickly. So what we need to do is to shift from that to, instead of doing things for our people, to doing things with our people. How can we be the supporter that allows them to get really important work done? And that's the mindset I take here. And I guess the second mindset that I take is this notion of an empathy mindset, which for me means, can I be visible in making sure that my people see that I see them? So the first step that we need to take in doing something really powerful for our people, for supporting our teams through difficult and stressful times, is to make sure that we see how that stress is impacting them. And that means getting behind the idea of just online delivery of or distance delivery of our educative experience. It means seeing that you may have a staff member who has elderly parents themselves that they're very concerned about. In our life here, we've got my wife, Anthea, who has a 97-year-old grandfather who lives independently about 25 minutes from us. Now, not only is he just one of the most incredible people on the planet and is outrageously resilient, but until a week or so ago, where we finally convinced him that staying home was his idea, which is often the battle, he's at risk, you know, and my wife's worried about it. Anthea's worried about him because he thinks that he's got the bravado to still jump in a cab and go down to the post office and to the bank and to the supermarket. And we've had to do what we can to help him with that. Now, for you to be able to see that while you have a strong focus on how we're going to do this pivoting in terms of education experience, what we also need to do is to make sure that you see that you've got staff members who might be experiencing something similar. You've got staff members who might feel that, for instance, that they're being put at risk themselves by standing in front of a room full of kids at the moment. There's certain states that have still got plenty of kids coming to school, certain schools that are still running at 50, 60, 70% attendance. And they may feel that there's a feeling of stress coming along for them that's associated with that. They may have kids of their own that they're now trying to balance because their school's closed and yours is open. And how are they handling that? So it's incredibly important that you see how this is impacting the people in your school, and that we don't make assumptions. One, that this is a purely educative process that we're going through here. And two, that we make assumptions that because we're feeling this way, that's how someone else must be feeling. To be honest, that's an act of sympathy. Whenever we make it about us, we show sympathies. We say, I know exactly what you're going through. No, you don't. I'm really sorry. An act of empathy is showing somebody that you can see what it is that they are going through. So it's critically important that you stop and I try to do that avoid that old expression of it's about walking a mile in someone else's shoes, because I just love the comeback too much that, because then you're a mile away and you've got their shoes. So, sorry, gags are really tricky on webinars because you just don't know how well they've landed or not. But I do think that it's critically important that we stop and think individually about our staff members and go, what is this person going through? And can I make response to that? Where I come from in that supporter mindset, and when I choose to be a leader that leads through empathy by seeing what's happening for other people and not assuming that they're going through a similar experience to me. And James and Lauren, I appreciate letting me know that the gag did land somewhere. Thank you very much. Is we're going to step through 4 Gs. And this breaks a couple of rules. Firstly, you're not supposed to use Gs. Just about every educational model that you see around the world these days uses Cs. I was very impressed in Amy's webinar yesterday that she used Fs when she talked about activities for teachers being fun, friendly and free. And you're supposed to use, apparently, to get people to engage with this kind of work, you're supposed to use an odd number. So you're supposed to go, the 5 steps to being a better leader. Well, I got 4 and they're a G, which is a little unusual, but I think that we live in unusual times. Even perhaps mentioning that we're going to rely on 4G today is somewhat ironic given the challenges that some of us are facing electronically, but let me get stuck into that anyway. So the first G that I want you to consider is gratitude. Now, gratitude, why it's important for teachers and leaders to first up make sure that they demonstrate gratitude is because what this builds into your educative offer, what this builds into your staff is trust. When people are apart, that's when trust gets tested. Now, if you look into the research around trust and a lot of the literature about people that really study trust closely, it's a very deep and very, in a lot of ways, ethereal kind of subject. But there are some truths that come out of decent studies of trusting organisations and trusting relationships. And one that is undoubted is the presence of a leader or a participant in a relationship where thanking and congratulating is a matter of ritual. It's a matter of routine. It happens over and over and over again. Some of this research even goes back to marriages, where they talk about marriages and long-term relationships, and they talk about trust and why is it that some marriages stick together and some really struggle and fall apart. And one of the things that's common in marriages that stay together and marriages that fall apart sometimes is they're clear about what they want the trust about. They want trust to exist around, say, fidelity and the way they treat each other, the way they speak to each other, roles in the house, roles in the family. They're clear. Everyone's clear about what their role is, but some marriages struggle and some don't. The marriages that don't struggle tend to be the ones where there's the prevalence, the ritual, the routine of thanking and congratulating each other for living up to those expectations, for stepping up and making that clear. Now, in your communication to your staff, there's a temptation at points like this because we've got kind of so much to do, so much to change, so much to reimagine, so much to redesign, so much to provide feedback about, is that we get very instructional in the way that we lead. But what I do want to do is point out that really effective leaders at this point begin with gratitude. And that's why this is G number 1. It's about stepping up first and saying, what I do want to do is acknowledge and thank how brilliant all of my key stakeholders have been. And for our staff, that's about thanking and congratulate them around the work that they're doing in connecting with your students and with your families. And indeed, with each other. I saw a fabulous example the other day. Casey Hennis is a principal at Orange Grove Public School in New South Wales, and we've just begun working with Casey. I wanted to show you this. What I want to do is to preface it by asking you to have a bit of a look, have a bit of a think about the way that Casey here, on day 1 that they've had their students absent physically from their school, the way that Casey has done a remarkable job of weaving gratitude, particularly for her staff, but purposefully for the way that they are connecting with their students, and the way that Casey's trying to make sure that gratitude is something that other people also value and demonstrate as well. I think it's brilliant, and I'm just going to show you this for just a quick minute or so. While you do that, I'm going to read the chat box so I can see what Lauren's asking me.
Good morning, everyone. This is Ms. Hennis. I just wanted to make a really quick video to say good luck on our first day of remote learning. I wanted to say thank you to our community who have sent us such kind messages and gestures, and I wanted to let you know that it really meant a lot to not only me, but to all of our staff, the teachers and support staff as well. And I'd really like to thank our staff, again, teaching and support staff, because they have really shown such wonderful commitment to our children and to public education. And I want to thank them for their professionalism and hard work in what was a very challenging week last week. In particular, in terms of my appreciation, I would like to thank the executive team who was such an incredible support to me last week, and Mrs. Shafetsky as the deputy. What an induction to Orange Grove Public School. But it's been great. So this has been a learning experience for us all, and I'm sure there might be a few hiccups along the way, but we'll work them out together. So have a great week, boys and girls. Make sure you are being respectful, responsible, and active learners. And I think most importantly, be very kind to your parents.
All right. So I think that one of the things, Lauren's asked a really valuable question there, and I just want to remind you when you do ask a question that there's a default sometimes in the chat box where it'll send it to all panelists. I want you to note that you can actually send that to all panelists and attendees. So I really want to encourage you to change that default if that's there. So for a lot of people, for instance, before who put their numbers in, that came to us as attendees, but it didn't go to everybody else. So just take that opportunity the next time you make a comment or ask a question, because I reckon other people are going to have answers to that as well. Apologies for not mentioning that a little earlier. Lauren asked the question, what if there are staff who think that the thanking and congratulating is just routine and therefore it's not genuine? And I agree, Lauren. I think that when we thank generically and routinely, it wears thin and people don't see an authenticity in that. What I think Casey's done particularly well is that when she spoke to thanking parents, she spoke about the kind messages they've sent. So she went from being generic to specific straight away. When she spoke about the staff, she thanked them for their hard work in a particularly challenging week last week. So she got specific about it. When she spoke about her executive team, she spoke specifically about their support for her personally. And when she spoke to the students, she set them up to be thanked and congratulated by being specific about asking them to be kind. I often make a joke when I am running professional learning about trust. And I talk about the fact that when it's that trust is built by the opportunity to be thanked and congratulated by for something that doing something that I value. And in my work, I travel a fair bit, and so I'm often, I think I can get in my bubble when I'm traveling, and so I'll think that I feel like I'm doing all the work because I'm flying in late and flying home late and getting hire cars and sleeping in motels and hotels in the far-flung corners of Australia. And I sort of forget that Anthea's holding the fort back here. And I forget that she's ferrying teenagers around while she's doing her own work, and she's, keeping the house running, and she's pretty tired as well when I go away. She works pretty hard. So I've made a habit for myself, which is when I drive home from the airport after a trip, I have to, on that car ride, I need to plan the next night's meal, and I try to cook the next night's meal. If Anthea says thank you for that meal, I appreciate it. That's nice, but if she says thank you over and over and over again just for cooking the meal, then okay, it's kind of expected and it's not really having much of an impact. But there was one night when Anthea said to me, I made this like salmon salad thing, I think it was. And I said, and she goes, thanks for the cooking that. She goes, you've never made that before with like the pine nut in it, the way that I really like the pine nuts. All right. Nearly every meal that I cook from now on for Anthea has pine nuts in it. And it's because she was specific. So Lauren, my advice to you in getting out of congratulating and thanking sounding routine is to be specific. Make sure you're thanking people not for existence, not for the ability to draw breath, but thank them for something specific they've done. And that behaviour will become repeatable. And therefore, any behaviour that's repeated becomes part of your culture. So that's a really important consideration. All right. So first G, gratitude. Second G, is granularity. And what I mean by that is that you need to break down, I guess what I want you to do is to, sometimes we come up with really big schemes, really big plans. We go to huge amounts of effort to try and get something, you know, jaw-droppingly amazing done, and we don't need to. Mainly because when you go to huge amounts of effort to get something jaw-droppingly amazing done, the return on that investment of time and effort isn't all that high. What we need to do is to choose things that are low effort but high return on investment. Lasada and Fredrickson came up with what was called the Lasada ratio in terms of relationships, and they said that in the most functional relationships, it's something their bizarre long ratio that sounds like pi is for every one negative in the most functional relationships, there's 2.9014, I think it is, positive. So roughly, if you want to round it up, and I do, roughly 3 to 1. And what they point out in the research is that the 3 positives don't need to be massive. So in great relationships, you know, say the relationship between a principal and a teacher, those 3 positives don't need to be, oh, you know, I spent an hour with you over coffee, shouting your Black Forest cake and hearing about your life. It can be as simple as a written post-it note dropped on a desk that says, you know, saw what you did this morning with Jamie. That was fantastic. Okay? It can be really quick. It can be a wink. But what we need to do is to make sure that those tiny little things that we systematize for those things to happen. A fabulous principle that I work with is creating habits at the moment that replace old habits that she had to be able to go online. So what she's doing is, she used to walk around every day with, part of her routine at the start of the day was to put her laptop on. While her laptop was booting up, she would reach across her desk, grab 4 post-it notes and put them in her pocket. And by the end of the day, she'd had to have written 4 positive notes and just made sure that they found their way to a teacher, either in a pigeonhole, stuck to a laptop, on a teacher desk, on a whiteboard, anywhere, but somehow 4 needed to go out during the day. Now she's deprived of that opportunity because she's not physically in the presence of her staff right at the moment. So she's just saying, well, how can I replace that habit? How could I be really quick? Because it's just, you know, it costs her no more than about 40 seconds a day. It's no more than 10 seconds a post-it note. How can I replace that? And she's using things like text messages, and she's using social media to just make sure that she does a little thing that sustains the strength and the functionality of those relationships. A couple of things that you can do around that is to, number one, is to be the person in your school that keeps an eye on the big picture. So if you're able to celebrate for your staff progress that continues to be made towards your school's objectives, I think that that's a really valuable thing to do. Highlighting successes is a really good thing to do. So if you're able to, either in written or verbally, a great thing to do now is to, most of our computers are replete with an app or a functionality of some sort that allows you to record voice messages. I've moved, as in our partner schools, when I do classroom visits and I provide feedback with teachers, I don't write any of it anymore. I record it as a voice message and send it out. And what I've noticed is a higher level of appreciation for that feedback because people can listen to it over and over again. Which is really cool. It can be shared really easily. So you can highlight the success really easily by making sure that other people are able to also share, celebrate, and congratulate, thank that person for the work that they've been doing. So if you're seeing someone who's done something really cool already, it's incredibly important that they're thanked and congratulated for doing that. I just want to look here. Melinda's got, I'll try to minimise the, here she goes again in relation to thanks by ensuring that we know about feedback, what we know about feedback as present, trying to ensure my thanks are explicit and timely. Exactly right, Melinda. And I think that the other thing that you can do there is be aware of the multiple channels by which we can thank and congratulate these days. I think that reduces the here she goes again thing, which means I don't just do it in assemblies. I don't just do it in emails. I don't just do it with post-it notes. I use all of the different channels I've got available to me, because then there's an element of personal and an element of the surprise in there. So making sure that you've got that available to you is a really useful thing to do. Another one that I think that it can be really important for a leader here to get granular is to focus on how you can habitualize this work. So if you, the thing I love about the teacher, the principal I know who's got the post-it notes, is that I think the clever part's not the post-it notes. The clever part is the way that she's habitualized it to be while her laptop is booting up for the day. If she's doing this, then she's doing that. It's called habit stacking. So I've been banging on about this a fair bit lately. So if you could say, well, when I put my bag down at the start of the day, I do this. While my laptop is booting up, I send one text message to a staff member. When I eat my lunch, after lunch, I need to make one phone call to a staff member to see if they're okay. They're all really small, granular things that you can do, and you can fit them into your day if you habitualize them. You can't fit great big projects around trying to make everyone feel good into the days that you've got at the moment. You've got probably more interruptions than you've ever had before. You've got new things to think about that you need to put a lot of mental energy into, but you can create new habits that will make sure that lots and lots of little positives are put out there that will allow you to keep relationships with your staff members in that functional range around 3 to 1. They're going to experience some negativity along this trip. They're going to experience some things that they get wrong. They're going to even, as Melinda was pointing out, get some feedback that says that probably should have tackled that a bit differently. They're going to get feedback from students around their engagement levels online and how well they thought this was done. And you being responsible for keeping them in that 3 to 1 range is some of the most powerful work that I think you can do. All right. Number 3. Before I introduce them, just going to, Clint, how do you ensure that staff members are not missed because all do a great job at some stage? Yeah, I think that it can be one of those things in the background, Clint, that you're keeping a little register on, that you're noticing that, I certainly used to do similar things to that as a principal, where if I was going to hand out, I used to on a Friday send out little messages to people, and a part of it was some performance planning stuff, some reminders, and part of it was that I would make sure that somebody got a message on a Friday. So for me, that was my habit. When I sent out my performance reminders, I sent out a random thank you for something that people had done, and I used to, tick them off. And I think that sometimes people think that that's a disingenuous thing to do, Clint. I think people go, now I'm sort of, trying to thank somebody for, for doing nothing. But it did actually, as a principal, make me stop and go, what have you noticed that this person is doing that's of value that you haven't had the opportunity to thank them for? And being really little about that, just a quick email, just a quick wink, just that post-it note, just those little things that you can do are really, really important. Mark's asking, are there any lessons we learned from the School of the Air where they've been remotely teaching for 80 years? Yeah, I haven't heard anyone mention this to this day. I think that, Mark, while I won't go too deeply into that, I do think that we need to try and hear a little more from what people who have been doing this for some time are already doing, because one of my frustrations, I think, about this whole process is that so many schools have been left to their own devices. I think that there are some lessons and some pitfalls that could be avoided if we were to go and ask people that are kind of experts in the space, what are the 3 things we should do and what are the 3 things we shouldn't. I think that'd be really useful. So Renee's agreeing as well. Yeah, keep me honest, to tick off a checklist with staff names to make sure that people get noticed. And I think it's probably Renee's experience too. I don't think people find it disingenuous. Often it's because it's private. And secondly, because it does genuinely force me to stop and think, what have I not noticed about this person's work lately? All right, generosity. In times of crisis, people really appreciate people who go out of their way to give the things that are the most important in that time of crisis. Now, I think that the things that people are desperately wanting you to be generous around are your time and your effort. And I think that if we can say, right, we're going to be generous with our time and effort as the fuel for keeping people up and running, then that's an incredibly powerful thing to do. I know that one of the things that I do to try and be generous to my principals that are in partnership with us at Real School is once a semester I send them all a book, and it's usually got absolutely nothing to do with education. And I wonder if you could do that. I wonder if, a lot of school leaders and principals have some sort of, little staff well-being bucket that we can sort of dip into. And I wonder if you thought about it, and if you thought about each staff member and what they're into, what floats their boat, what personally makes them feel good. What could you find a book that you could send to some of your staff members, or even all of them, that doesn't say, "Oh, here, read this because I want you to be up on Fulham's latest work before you come back for next term." It's not, "Oh, this is how you do online learning. Here, just read these 300 pages before you do your next lesson." But it just says, "I see you. I see who you are, and I want to be generous about giving you something that helps you be fully expressed as a person." I think that that's a really important thing that you can do. I spoke to one principal the other day, and when I talked before about low effort and high return on investment, I think that one of the things, I saw one principal the other day and said, "You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to give away my toilet paper." And I thought, that's awesome. He said, "Well, we're not going to need it for a little while, so, and I can always order more." So he asked his staff members that if you're coming in and packing up your stuff and taking all your gear with you to go and do online learning, each of them had a couple of rolls of toilet paper shoved into their pigeonhole. I just thought that was so clever, and what a brilliant way to express generosity. Generosity is about not giving someone what they already have or don't need. It's about giving something that people need at this time. And I thought that was a really fabulous way to get that done. Other things that you can do is, what's a very generous thing is to give of your personality. And that is sometimes to forgive someone, to actually stop and think, who's my staff member at this moment who has carried with them back into their homes at this point, or is carrying around in their work at the moment, some sort of grudge, some sort of weight around their neck as a result of the relationship that I have with that person. Can I just forgive them? Can I just say, "You know what, I'm going to ring them up and I'm going to say, hey, I've just got an opportunity here to stop and think. And I've been thinking that, what you did back then and the way I reacted to it was an overreaction. Maybe it's not, but, and I'm going to I just want to let you know that that's not a problem anymore. That's over with. I'm not going to carry that anymore. And I hope you appreciate that too." Sometimes, anytime as teachers, the funny thing about asking people to change practice as teachers is we take our practice so personally. And so when somebody has made a mistake, they often carry the shame and embarrassment of that with them forever, particularly if it's a public one. It might be a teacher who, even if their class messed up a class assembly item, or, ripped apart a PE teacher or something like that, it can be really useful to make sure that you just forgive that person. Just let them know that you've drawn a line behind that. Some fabulous, I won't comment too much because I'm just so rapt to see some of the contributions there by Anne-Marie, by Simon, by Victoria. So I hope, if you're not, that you're making sure. Simon and Victoria, can I encourage you to make sure that you repost those ideas that you've got there? Repost them to all panelists and attendees if you can, because there's a couple of really fabulous ideas that I want everyone to be able to see, if that's cool. So a couple of other things that you can do is to share your own IP. A generosity is to be able to teach people in your staff what makes you an effective leader. So I think that that's a really powerful thing to do, is to share your IP. And I think the other thing, and this is something that people sometimes forget when it comes to generosity, is that true generosity, if you want to amp up, if you want to go to generosity plus, is to do it anonymously. So it's a fabulous way to make generosity cultural, because there's no payoff as a part of it. You're letting people know that this is just being done because somebody here appreciates, not that it's you. So making sure that you're the person that is, those post-it notes, those messages in pigeonholes, little gifts, things like that, don't have to be signed from Adam. They can be just left there, and just let them do their good on their own. And people genuinely appreciate, because they know there's no hidden agenda in that. When there's no direct payoff, when you don't need to be thanked and congratulated because you already believe that there's trust in the relationship, then generosity goes to a whole new level, which is just a fabulous thing to have happen. And then the final thing that I want to mention today is the fourth G of growth, which means really what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about progress, but the thing annoyed me was that, if I had 3 G's and a P, that just wouldn't work very well. So I went with growth. So what I'm really saying here is make progress and growth visible. Make sure that people can see that they are making progress here. Now, I want to make a couple of suggestions to you here. We are utterly, as human beings, is something that as human beings, we are thoroughly obsessed and addicted to progress. I was watching recently, earlier this year, I went on a long haul flight when family and I, actually it was last year now, went to Europe. It was lovely. We were holiday of a lifetime kind of stuff. And we went to France and Italy, 2 places that I'm glad I'm not at the moment. And on the way back, I was watching, I don't know if any of you do this, I'm a bit of an intense people watcher. On the way back, I was sitting in an aisle seat. And when I'm in the aisle, I find myself watching the screen of the person who is the row in front and diagonally across the aisle from me. I eavesdrop and I notice what they're watching on their little screen in their seat. And I was watching a woman sitting diagonally to my right across from in front of me, and she was watching what has been research proven to be the most watched TV station on a plane, and that is the station that shows the little plane flying across the ocean, flying across the world. And not a movie channel, not a games channel, not a TV show, not a podcast. It's that little white plane making progress. Now, it's boring. It's horribly boring. But I watched her, and I watched when the plane eventually made a little 2-pixel move, and just moved that tiny little bit further across the Indian Ocean. And I watched her sit bolt upright, and I watched a broad smile creep across her face. So impressed and so rapt was she with the progress that had been made, despite the fact it's ridiculously boring. She looked I think she caught me. She sort of looked over my shoulder and she said, "You just saw that, did you?" And I said, "Yeah, I did." I said, she goes, "Oh, I just want to get home." And so the progress towards a goal is incredibly important. And if you can make that progress visible for people, if you can game it so that it's kind of like, I can see the scoreboard, I can see that I'm getting better, I can see that I'm getting somewhere, then you will do something powerful for your people. One that I was discussing a couple of weeks ago with somebody was around this notion of taking learning online, and they were talking about how it is that we could make sure that people were just as focused or even more focused on connection through online learning than content delivery. So connection and content, 2 almost competing ideas about what we should focus on for online learning. And what she asked was, what she was planning to do was to ask her staff that when they do something fabulous around content or connection, could they just send her a quick email or a message that says, "I've done this." And what she's doing is creating 2 planes that sit on like a slide, like a PowerPoint slide. And there's one plane for content and there's one plane for connection. And every week she's going to move the plane and the plane for content and the plane for connection. I think one's blue and one's red. She's going to move them across the screen by the amount of messages that have been sent to her around either. And her impulsion, what she's compelling her staff to do is to try and keep the content, the connection plane in front of the content plane. She's saying, we want to keep making more progress on connection than we do on content. We don't want the content plane to stay still because nobody's motivated by that. But we want to make sure that connection comes first. And I reckon that is ridiculously clever. I think that you could take that and use it in any sort of direction that you wanted to go in from there. So, I think that if you were to create a PowerPoint slide that looked like, I know that if you go onto, Google Images and just, Google Post-it notes. You can get a screen that's got like just full of, you know, Post-it notes. And what you could do then is tell your staff that we're going to have a prize, a bit of relief. You might cancel an online staff meeting if their people can make sure that they fill the Post-it note on the screen with great ideas for online learning, for discoveries. What did we discover about online learning? Can we discover and put on there our mistakes? Could we look to actually gamify the notion of taking such risk in what we're doing by mucking around with it and trying all sorts of new things, that discoveries are allowed to be successes as well as failures? And what you do when you build celebration of success and failure into your organisation is you build resilience. And, we're going to need a bit of that over the next few months as well, aren't we? So I hope, again, you're paying attention. Brooks' chocolate fairy is a cracking idea there. Using food, as Elizabeth points out, is a great way. Random coffee orders is just a terrific way. So I'm just wrapped that we've got so many people sharing these bits and pieces here. That's just awesome. So could I ask you, they're my 4 Gs. Okay, we've got gratitude, granularity, generosity, and growth. Could you tell me which of the ideas that I've presented to you today, or that you've seen in the chat box? I'm a firm believer that great teaching is 90% theft, and I also believe that great school leadership is 90% theft. Could you tell me in the chat box, what are you stealing today? What's the idea that go, I like that one. I think I might take that and run with it. I'll give you just a moment to put your ideas in there, and then I want to give you a couple of other 3 things that you can get involved in. The values box idea, yeah, good one. Birthday buddies, yeah, good stuff. Thanks, Chris. Great to have you on here. Hope Bachelor's going well and treating you well at the moment. Far-flung corners, the MT there. Being granular from Mark. Gratitude, keeping it real. Keep it regular. Don't miss anybody. Be specific, Anne-Marie. Promoting connection and versus content. I think that's, for me, in designing the presentation today, was something that I really wanted to make sure I got out there. And wow, we're getting some really good ones through there. Oops, just accidentally press a button. All right, wanted to make sure that was there so that you're recording the voice message, sticky notes ideas, being granular, being small, 3-to-1 ratio. It doesn't have to be big, it just has to exist. All right, that's awesome. So great to see some of those ideas going through. Can I give you a couple of little things that you can do before you leave? Number 1 is send the link. You would have seen some of the links come through the chat box that Simon and Amy have been posting. Simon's going to do some work tomorrow around managing emotions, managing the way that the brain functions when there's times of stress and emotion. So really want to encourage you, leaders who are in the webinar today, grab that link, flick it out to your teachers, get them involved in that one. They're going to get an enormous amount from that. I'm running several school cultural hood lifts at the moment. So for all of the people, we've got, we had more than 50 people that register for this webinar, which just astounded me. And so many people who are in today, and I always tell our people that 50% on a webinar is attendance on a webinar is fantastic. This is way beyond that. So if you need a chat, if you're just if you just think, well, I'm gonna, I wouldn't mind just bouncing a couple of ideas off someone. I just want you to know that I'm there for that chat. There's no strings. You're not going to be sold anything. We just want to be of service to you at the moment. We've got 3 big imperatives at the moment, and they're service, generosity, and advocacy. So if you would like to do that, then please make sure that you have a look for the link on that. I haven't got it with me at the moment. I don't know whether maybe Simon and Amy could see that link and chuck that in the chat box in the time that we've got. There's just a little instruction without notice. If you would like, we've got a book here, which is one of these little questions, curly questions that you can ask your staff that we have been selling for $19.95. But if you would like a copy of that book, some people have even already got one. I know it can see online. But if you would like a copy of that book sent to you for free as our thank you for putting your time aside today to invest in your staff, then in the chat box, just write the word book, and we're going to make that happen for you. So please make sure that you take advantage of that and just write the word book and we're going to put that in the mail. Chris will follow up with you, our business manager, and get your postal address, and she'll get that in the mail too. It's a bit of a resource, works like a bit of a journal, 100 questions that all built to help you and your staff to be able to try and build what we call a level of school awareness of who you are as a school. So make sure you take advantage of that. And then there's this one that I reckon, I think Amy posted a link earlier on. Amy got in with the hood lifts, well done. She also, I think, got in earlier on with the trip. We're running a trivia night. This is just to try and get some laughter back into our school. So with school leaders, if you would like to take the link to the trivia night that's in the chat box today, and send that out to your teachers. We've had more than 100 people register already. You bring your own drinks and your own food, but we have been absolutely cacking ourselves at putting the questions and the activities together for the night. And it's just something we want to do to acknowledge that this has been a tricky time for everybody. And there's no agenda here other than to put some smiles on the faces of educators. So feel free to send that link out to all of your people as well. And hey, make sure that a lot of what we're doing at the moment is going through the Facebook page. So please feel free to jump on and like that page. And by all means, if there's anything we can do to give you a hand, then just reach out by email, check out the website, give us a call, whatever we can do, that's what we're up for. So I'm just going to do one final check of I'm just noticing that I didn't once check the attendee list to see if anyone had their hand up and wanted to speak. So luckily there's no hands up, but we've had frantic activity in the chat box. I hope that's been a real value to all of you as well. Michelle, thank you for coming along to your first session. I'm glad you've had a great time. Karen, hope you got plenty out of it as well. Thank you. All right, I'm going to let you all go. Thank you so much for that. Keep coming along. We want to help. And keep doing the amazing work that you're doing, even if that includes getting out of the way of people. All right, have a good one, everyone. Talk to you again soon. Bye.